The air inside the Jefferson County Courthouse felt thick enough to choke on. Sunlight streamed in through tall, dust-coated windows, but it did little to brighten the atmosphere. Every creak of the wooden benches echoed sharply, making people glance over their shoulders. The trial had already been going on for 3 days, and though this morning's session was expected to be routine, an underlying current of tension rippled through the spectators. Everyone in that room knew this. Case wasn't just another petty crime hearing. It was a trial for an armed home invasion that had left a mother fighting for her life. For weeks, the small Ohio town had been buzzing with speculation, not just about the defendant, Marcus Trent, but about the fact that the prosecution's key witness was a 3-year-old girl. Some saw it as a desperate move. Others whispered that it was brilliant. But no one, not even the presiding judge, truly believed the child's testimony would amount to much. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open, and every head turned. Officer Daniels stepped inside, the crisp navy of his uniform immaculate, his polished badge catching the light. But it wasn't the officer who drew the most attention. It was the dog at his side. Max, a sleek German shepherd with alert amber. Eyes moved with disciplined precision, his nails clicking softly against the marble floor. A murmur passed through the spectators. Some recognized Max from local news stories. He was the department's top K9, famous for tracking suspects and sniffing out hidden evidence. But today, his purpose seemed unclear. After all, this wasn't a search and rescue mission or a drug bust. This was a courtroom. Max's presence stirred curiosity. The defense attorney, a tall, thin man with slick-back hair named Leonard Brooks, smirked faintly as he leaned over to whisper something to his client. Marcus Trent sat motionless, his eyes locked on the dog. At the front, Judge Eleanor Whitford adjusted her glasses and looked over the rim toward Daniels. "Officer," she said, her voice steady but mildly impatient, "the court is ready to proceed. I assume the K9's presence serves a specific purpose." Daniels nodded respectfully. "Yes, Your Honor. Max is here as a comfort support for the minor witness. He hesitated briefly, reluctant to speak in unfamiliar environments. "We're hoping his presence will help her feel safe enough to testify." The judge pursed her lips. "The court will permit it. Proceed." On the prosecution side, Assistant District Attorney Claire Hastings was shuffling through her notes, though her movements seemed almost mechanical. She had built her case on forensic evidence, security footage, and the hope, a fragile, wavering hope, that the child could connect the last dots for the jury. Still, she'd been a prosecutor long enough to know that jurors didn't place much weight on the words of a toddler. Too young, too easily influenced, the defense would pounce on that angle immediately. Across the aisle, Leonard Brooks had already prepared his strategy. Portray the girl's testimony as sweet but unreliable, painting any details as a result of suggestion from adults. If he succeeded, it could plant just enough doubt to secure an acquittal. The bailiff, a barrel-chested man named Roger Pike, stepped to the doorway and peered into the hallway. Then he turned back into the courtroom and called, "The witness may enter." Every head in the room swiveled again, this time toward the small gap between the towering double doors. Lily Harper appeared in the doorway, clutching the hand of her grandmother, Margaret Harper. The little girl's hair was tied into 2 uneven pigtails, one bow slightly drooping. In her other arm, she clung to a stuffed bunny so worn its left ear was hanging by a few loose threads. She looked impossibly small against the backdrop of the grand courtroom. Margaret guided her forward slowly, her expression protective, almost defiant, as though daring anyone to intimidate her granddaughter. The jury's eyes soft at the sight. A couple of them exchanged glances, perhaps thinking of their own children or grandchildren. Lily's gaze darted around the room. taking in the high ceilings, the rows of strangers, the judge looming above. Her little shoulders tensed, and she instinctively stepped closer to her grandmother, half hiding behind her skirt. Claire Hastings rose from her chair and approached with a careful, warm smile. "Hi, Lily. My name's Claire. Remember, I came to visit you with Officer Daniels?" Lily didn't answer. She simply nodded once, so faintly it was almost imperceptible. Leonard Brooks leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. "This is going to be a long day," he muttered to his client. The judge's gavel tapped lightly against the block. "Let's keep moving, counsel." Claire crouched to Lily's level. "You see Max over there?" At the mention of his name, Max tilted his head and gave a gentle wag of his tail. Lily's eyes flickered toward the dog, and for a brief moment, her guarded expression cracked. She loosened her grip on her grandmother's hand, though she didn't let go. Officer Daniels stepped forward, keeping his tone soft. "He's a really good listener, Lily. You can tell him anything, and he never interrupts." A tiny smile ghosted across Lily's face. She looked at Max again. The defense attorney rolled his eyes theatrically, as if to say the dog was nothing more than a gimmick. But Claire Hastings knew what she was seeing. That was the first glimmer of connection Lily had shown all morning. Judge Whitford noticed it too. She leaned back slightly, observing the exchange with newfound curiosity. In the gallery, spectators shifted, sensing something unusual in the air. They didn't know it yet, but this moment, a hesitant little girl and a patient police, dog-locking eyes, would become the turning point of the entire case. The prosecutor straightened, glancing toward the judge. "Your Honor, with your permission, we'd like to allow Max to sit beside the witness during her testimony." The judge nodded once. Permission granted. Daniels gave a subtle hand signal, and Max padded forward, his movements calm and measured. He stopped beside Lily and sat down, his posture tall but relaxed. Lily blinked at him for a moment, then reached out her tiny hand. Max leaned in just enough for her fingers to brush his fur. She giggled softly, the first sound she had made since entering the courtroom. The sound was small, but it broke the tension in the room like a crack in ice. From the defense table, Brooks still looked unconvinced, but even he couldn't deny the shift in atmosphere. Claire Hastings, however, felt her pulse quicken. Something told her that the little girl who had barely spoken to adults since the attack might just find her voice today, and if she did, it would change everything. Lily stood frozen for a moment, after touching Max's fur, her tiny hand still hovering in midair. She glanced quickly at her grandmother, who gave her an encouraging nod. Margaret Harper's grip on the stuffed bunny loosened just enough for Lily to clutch it to her chest again. Officer Daniels crouched slightly, so his face was level with hers. "Max really likes meeting new friends," he said softly. "Do you want to sit next to him while we talk?" Lily looked at the big German shepherd. His ears perked, but his body relaxed. She didn't say anything, but she took one small step closer. The courtroom was so quiet that the sound of her little shoes tapping the floor seemed loud. Even the air conditioning's hum felt muted as all eyes followed the slow, careful approach. When she reached Max's side, she knelt down on the carpet. Max leaned forward just enough for her to place a hand on the top of his head. His fur was warm and surprisingly soft. The prosecutor, Claire Hastings, stayed where she was, careful not to rush the moment. She knew from her previous visit to Lily's home that pushing too soon would cause the little girl to retreat into silence again. From the defense table, Leonard Brooks crossed his arms, masking his annoyance with a faint smirk. He leaned toward his client and whispered, "See? She's not going to talk. They'll get nothing." Marcus Trent, the defendant, didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the child, but not in a warm way. There was a coldness in his stare, a hint of recognition that made Margaret Harper's stomach tighten. Judge Whitford, observing from the bench, leaned her chin on one hand. The veteran judge had seen plenty of young witnesses, but rarely one this young in such a serious case. Claire Hastings took a slow step forward, her heels clicking lightly against the wooden floor. "Lily," she said gently, "do you remember when Officer Daniels and I came to your house?" The child's eyes flicked up to meet hers for a fraction of a second before dropping back to Max. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Claire smiled. "That was a good day. You showed me your bunny and told me his name. Do you remember?" This time, Lily gave a slightly bigger nod. "What's his name again?" Claire asked. Lily's lips moved, but the sound was barely audible. Claire stepped a little closer. "Could you tell me again?" In a tiny voice, almost a whisper, Lily said, "Buttons." The word, though, quiet, seemed to ripple through the room. For the first time, the jury heard her voice. A small smile tugged at Claire's lips. "Buttons is a very good name. And Buttons was there the night someone hurt your mommy, right?" Lily's little fingers tightened on the bunny's neck. She didn't answer. Officer Daniels crouched beside her. "You can tell Max," he said. "He's very good at keeping secrets." Lily glanced at Max. The dog blinked slowly, as though to say he was listening. And then it happened. She leaned forward and whispered something into Max's ear. The dog remained perfectly still, his head tilted slightly. It looked, to the casual observer, almost as if he understood her words. "Max is listening," Danielle said softly. "What did you tell him?" Lily looked up at him, then over at Claire. Her voice was still small, but it carried just enough for the court reporter to hear. "I told him the man had a ripped coat," she said. Claire froze, her pen hovering above her legal pad. That was a detail they had never mentioned to the public, not in interviews, not in court filings, nowhere. The defense attorney's smirk faltered slightly. "What else can you tell Max?" Daniels asked gently. Lily looked down at the floor, thinking. Then she whispered again into Max's ear. This time, when she straightened, she spoke louder. "He smelled funny, like the flowers in Grandma's hallway." Margaret Harper's eyes widened. She knew exactly what Lily meant. She had a vase of lily in the hallway, but that wasn't the smell her granddaughter was describing. She had said the same thing weeks ago, and the police had linked it to a very specific brand of men's cologne found on the suspect's clothing. Claire Hastings decided to test the moment. "Lily, can you tell Max what the man looked like?" The little girl hesitated, then said, "He had pictures on his arm." Claire's heart pounded. "The tattoos." At the defense table, Brooks' pen stopped moving. His eyes darted to his client's forearms, covered now by a long-sleeved shirt, but unmistakable to those who knew. The jury members shifted, exchanging glances. It was clear they were already connecting the dots. Leonard Brooks quickly rose to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Leading the witness, and this is an unreliable source. She's a child, a toddler. We can't accept this as credible testimony." Judge Whitford raised a hand. "Overruled for now. The court will hear the witness. Continue, Miss Hastings." The prosecutor took a breath. She knew the clock was ticking before Brooks tried again to shut it down. "Lily," she said softly, "you're doing so well. Can you tell Max what the man said to you that night?" Lily's small face tightened. She looked at her grandmother, who gave her a reassuring nod. Then she whispered one more time into Max's ear before looking at Claire. "He told me not to talk," she said. "He said if I talk, Mommy won't wake up." The entire courtroom went still. Even Brooks didn't immediately object, perhaps too stunned by the bluntness of her statement. Marcus Trent's jaw clenched, his gaze hardening. Margaret Harper reached down and placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. her own eyes glassy with tears. Claire Hastings gave a slight nod. To Officer Daniels. The connection between the girl and the dog had worked, more than she could have hoped. From the bench, Judge Whitford glanced at the jury. She could tell the moment had landed deeply with them. Whether or not the defense liked it, they had just witnessed a child speak the truth in the only way she felt safe, through her trust. In a dog who never asked her to be braver than she could be. And somewhere in the crowd, a reporter's pen scratched faster, knowing this moment would be tomorrow's front-page story. The courtroom, moments ago thick with skepticism, now seemed to be holding its breath. Lily sat cross-legged on the witness chair, her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm, one small hand resting lightly on Max's back. It was the kind of picture that might have looked cute in any other setting, but here it was something different, something quietly powerful. Max didn't move. His large frame stayed perfectly still, the way only a trained canine could manage, but his tail gave a slow, rhythmic thump against the floor, every now and then. It was as if each gentle wag was a signal to Lily. I'm here. You're safe. Officer Daniels had seen Max work dozens of times, tracking suspects, sniffing out hidden drugs, finding lost children in the woods. But he'd never seen him connect with someone this fast. With most people, there was a cautious sniff, a readjustment, a period of quiet assessment. With Lily, there had been none of that. From the moment she'd touched his head, something had clicked. And it wasn't just Daniels who noticed. Judge Whitford, whose decades on the bench had hardened her to courtroom theatrics, was leaning slightly forward now, watching closely. The jurors, too, seemed entranced, their earlier doubts melting into a collective, unspoken question. What else might this little girl say if she keeps talking to that dog? The prosecutor, Claire Hastings, was careful not to rush it. She knew better than to break the fragile trust forming between the child and the animal. Her job for the moment was to guide that trust toward answers, without making Lily feel like she was being interrogated. Lily, Claire began, her voice steady but warm. Does Max remind you of anyone? The girl tilted her head slightly, thinking. He's like Grandpa's dog, she said after a pause. But Grandpa's dog barks too much. A few chuckles broke the tension, but Max remained unflappable, his gaze fixed softly on Lily. Do you think Max likes listening to you? Claire asked. Lily nodded. He doesn't look away. Those words carried more weight than they seemed. For a child who had lived through something so frightening, the simple act of someone, even a dog, giving her their full attention was grounding. From the defense table, Leonard Brooks cleared his throat loudly, clearly annoyed by the slow, deliberate pacing of the questioning. But his client, Marcus Trent, was watching something else entirely. Max, his eyes narrowed as if the dog's calm focus was somehow unsettling. Claire continued. Lily, when you tell Max something, does it make you feel better? Yes, Lily said quietly. What did you tell him before, when you leaned close? Lily glanced at Max again, as though seeking permission. I told him about the man, she said. Brooks was on his feet instantly. Objection. She's already given a description. This is repetitive and leading. Judge Whitford didn't even look at him. Overruled. Sit down, Mr. Brooks. Brooks dropped into his chair, frowning. Claire's tone softened even more. It's okay, Lily. You can tell Max again. Or you can tell me. Either way, we're listening. The little girl hesitated, then shifted closer to Max. She pressed her lips to his ear, speaking in a whisper no one else could hear. When she pulled back, her gaze met Claire's. He had mean eyes, she said. The phrase was simple, but it landed hard. The jury's eyes flicked toward the defendant. Marcus Trent's jaw tightened, and for a fraction of a second, there was a flicker of something in his expression. Recognition, maybe even fear, before it vanished behind. A blank mask. Claire Hastings didn't need more detail at that moment. She wanted the jury to sit with those 3 words. Mean eyes. In a case built on both physical evidence and emotional weight, those words painted a vivid picture no photograph could. She decided to push just a little further. Lily, did you and Max talk about anything else? Yes, the child said, without hesitation this time. I told him the man was here. A ripple of shock swept through the courtroom. Here? Claire asked gently. Where is he? Lily's small finger lifted and pointed directly toward the defense table. The sound in the courtroom changed instantly. A sharp intake of breath from the spectators, the shuffle of feet as people instinctively leaned forward. Brooks jumped up again, nearly knocking over his chair. Objection! This is outrageous. She's a child. She could be pointing at anyone. But the damage was already done. Every juror had followed her finger. Every juror had seen where it landed. Judge Whitford banged her gavel once, restoring order. The objection is noted, but the witness's statement will remain on the record. Continue, Miss Hastings. Claire knew she had to tread carefully now. Lily, she said, her voice calm but deliberate, how do you know that man? Lily hugged her bunny tighter. He came to our house. He hurt Mommy. No one breathed for a moment. Even Brooks, who had been so quick to object before, seemed momentarily stunned into silence. Marcus Trent's face remained a mask, but his hand tightened around the edge of the defense table, the knuckles white. Margaret Harper reached out from her seat just behind the witness stand and touched her granddaughter's shoulder. You're doing so well, sweetheart, she whispered. Max shifted slightly, leaning into Lily's leg, and she relaxed just a little. Claire gave a small nod, satisfied with what had been said for now. She didn't want to push too far in. A single stretch. The key was keeping Lily's trust intact for the rest of the questioning. But as she returned to her seat, she caught the eyes of 2 jurors in the front row. They weren't just listening anymore. They were believing. And all because of an unlikely connection, one that didn't come from a cross-examination or a clever legal maneuver, but from a child and a dog who seemed to understand each other in a way no one else could. The silence in the courtroom after Lily pointed to the defendant felt heavy, almost physical. It pressed against the walls, thick enough to make even the seasoned court clerk glance up from her notepad. Lily sat very still in the witness chair, her stuffed bunny still tucked under her arm, one small hand resting on Max's fur. The big German shepherd remained unmoving, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the tension vibrating through the room. Claire Hastings, the prosecutor, felt her pulse in her ears. She had to be careful now. Too many questions in rapid succession could overwhelm the child. But she also knew they had just crossed into dangerous, high-stakes territory. Lily, she said softly, you're doing such a brave job. Can you tell Max more about what happened that night? The little girl's eyes darted briefly toward the defense table, toward Marcus Trent. Her tiny shoulders hunched as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Officer Daniels crouched beside her, speaking in a gentle, almost conspiratorial tone. Remember, Max is right here. He won't let anything bad happen while you're talking to him. Lily looked at Max again. The dog blinked slowly, his gaze steady. That was all it took. She leaned forward and pressed her lips close to his ear, whispering. No one else could hear, but the intensity on her face told the court she was recalling something vivid. When she sat back up, she didn't look at Daniels or Claire. She spoke directly to the dog. Max knows the man who hurt Mommy. The words were soft, but they landed like a hammer blow. A murmur rippled through the spectators. The court reporter's fingers tapped rapidly, ensuring every syllable was preserved in the official record. Claire's breath caught, but she kept her voice calm. Lily, how does Max know the man? The little girl frowned slightly, thinking, because he smelled like him. Now Daniel's eyes sharpened. What did he smell like? Claire asked. Like the flowers in Grandma's hallway, Lily said. Margaret Harper gasped quietly. She knew exactly what Lily meant, and it wasn't flowers. She had told the police weeks earlier that Lily had once said those words, describing a strange, overpowering scent after the attack. Investigators later determined it was a very specific cologne, a luxury brand not common in Jefferson County. That same cologne had been detected on a torn jacket recovered from a dumpster 3 streets from the Harper home. A jacket with a ripped sleeve, matching Lily's earlier statement. From the defense table, Brooks leaned back, forcing a smirk. Coincidence, he muttered under his breath to Trent. But the defense attorney's pen was tapping faster than before. Attell Daniels recognized as nervous energy. Claire took a cautious step forward. Lily, can you tell Max more about the man's clothes? The girl nodded slowly. He had a black coat. One sleeve was funny. What do you mean by funny? It was ripped here, she said, pointing to her upper arm. Claire's gaze flicked toward the jury. Every one of them was watching intently now. Officer Daniels' voice remained steady, but inside he was reeling. Not only was Lily recalling details with striking accuracy, but every piece aligned with physical evidence they had deliberately kept from the press. There was no way she could have been coached on this without someone inside law enforcement leaking it, and that hadn't happened. Claire pressed just a little further. Did the man say anything to you? Lily's expression changed instantly. Her little fingers tightened on her bunny's neck until the stuffing bulged. Her bottom lip trembled. It's okay, Daniels said quickly. Max is listening. Just tell him. Lily leaned forward again, whispering into the dog's ear. For several seconds, Max didn't move, his eyes locked on hers. When she pulled back, she looked at Claire, her voice shaking. He said, if I talked, Mommy wouldn't wake up. The words hit the courtroom like a crack of thunder. Gasps erupted from the gallery. One juror's mouth fell open. Another pressed her hand to her chest. Brooks jumped to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. She's far too young to. Judge Whitford's gavel slammed down once. Overruled. The statement will stand. Continue, Miss Hastings. Brooks froze for a second, his mouth hanging open, before reluctantly sitting. Marcus Trent stared at Lily with a cold, unblinking expression. If the girl noticed, she didn't react. Max was still there, a silent barrier between her and the man at the defense table. Claire, feeling the momentum but determined not to push Lily past her limit, stepped back slightly. You're doing so well, Lily. You've been so brave. Lily's gaze softened as she looked at Max. She reached out and smoothed his fur. With her small hand, the motion slow and almost rhythmic, as if grounding herself. For the first time in 3 days of trial, Claire felt the scales tip visibly in their favor. Not because of a dramatic confession from the defendant, or some sudden piece of forensic evidence, but because a 3-year-old girl had found her voice in the presence of a dog who asked for nothing in return. Judge Whitford glanced at the jury. She could see it in their eyes. They weren't just hearing Lily's words, they believed them. What none of them realized, not yet, was that this was only the beginning of what Lily would reveal. The courtroom had fallen into a strange kind of silence after Lily's words. Not the kind of quiet that comes from people simply not speaking, but the kind that follows a collective breath being held. Marcus Trent shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening on the edge of the defense table. Attorney Brooks leaned close, muttering something, but Trent didn't seem to hear. Max, the K9, was still sitting beside Lily, but something in his posture had shifted. His ears were forward, his gaze unwavering. Officer Daniels, who knew Max better than anyone, noticed it immediately. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The dog was alert, keyed in, and fixating. Daniel's instincts prickled. This wasn't just Max listening to a story. This was Max processing, reacting to a specific sensory trigger. Lily gave the dog another gentle stroke, but Max's nostrils flared slightly. He leaned his head forward, not toward Lily, but toward the defense table. The movement was so small, most in the room didn't register it. Daniels did. So did Claire Hastings. Claire caught Daniel's eye, raising her brows in the faintest question. Daniels didn't respond verbally, just gave the barest nod. Judge Whitford noticed as well. Her gaze flicked from Max to Trent, then back again. The judge's voice cut into the tension. We will take a short recess. Jury, please step out. The jurors filed into the side room, whispering among themselves. The moment the door closed, the judge leaned forward. Mr. Daniels, am I correct in observing that your K9 appears to be reacting? Daniels cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Max is trained to detect specific scents, including certain chemical compounds found in high-end colognes. His reaction suggests he recognizes a scent in this room. Brooks was on his feet instantly. Objection. This is absurd. The dog's reaction is not admissible evidence. This is pure theatrics. The judge raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Brooks. I'm not admitting anything yet, but I am concerned. Claire stepped forward, her voice measured. Your Honor, weeks ago Max alerted to a jacket found in a dumpster. A jacket tied by forensics to the crime scene. That jacket carried a rare scent compound found in the defendant's brand of cologne. The same reaction we saw today occurred then. Brooks slammed a hand on the table. Speculation. Whitford's gaze was ice. Mr. Brooks, unless you want contempt on top of your caseload, control yourself. Daniels crouched beside Max, giving the hand signal for confirm. Max's tail remained still, his body rigid. Then, in one slow, deliberate movement, the dog stood and turned his full body toward Trent. The room seemed to shrink. Mr. Trent, the judge said slowly, I remind you that you are under no obligation to respond to this. But I must. Allow the record to reflect the K9's behavior. Trent leaned back in his chair, an unconvincing smirk tugging at his lips. So what? Maybe the dog doesn't like me. Lily, still holding her bunny, spoke up in her small, clear voice. Max doesn't bark unless he's sure. Every eye swung toward her. She wasn't smiling. All right, the judge said firmly. Recess will stand. Jury will be recalled in 15 minutes. The bailiff escorted Lily out with Margaret Harper, while Daniels led Max toward the rear hallway. Once they were alone, Daniels crouched down, looking Max in the eyes. You're telling me it's him, aren't you, boy? Max's slow blink was answer enough for Daniels, who'd trusted this dog through narcotics busts, missing person searches, and even a hostage rescue. Max never signaled unless he was certain. When court reconvened, the jury re-entered, their curiosity sharpened by the interruption. Claire resumed her questioning with careful precision, building on the details Lily had provided before the break. Lily, she began gently, do you remember anything else the man smelled like? The little girl tilted her head. Like the flowers, but also like the soap in the kitchen after Mommy washed dishes. Claire froze. The detail was striking and dangerous for the defense. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, the forensics report on the jacket indicated traces of a citrus-based degreasing soap, the same brand found in the Harper home. Brooks objected again, but the jury had already heard the connection. Then it happened. Max, still seated beside Daniels, gave a sudden, low bark. The sound was deep, resonant, and impossible to ignore. His body was taut, eyes locked on Trent. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. "Mr. Daniels, control your animal." Brooks barked. Daniels didn't move. "He's not out of control. He's alerting." Lily's small voice broke. The tension again. "That's what he did when we found Mommy." The air went heavy. Trent's jaw clenched. His smirk was gone now, replaced with a tight, brittle expression. Judge Whitford's gaze swept from Max to the defendant. "This court will take note of the canine's behavior. While the dog's reaction is not direct evidence, it will remain in the record alongside the witness testimony." Claire felt her pulse steady. This wasn't the same as having Trent's fingerprints on the weapon, but it was another layer of connection the jury would not forget. A layer made visceral by the sight of a loyal, highly trained dog singling him out. As the jury absorbed the moment, Claire's mind was already moving ahead. Lily wasn't done. There was more she hadn't said yet, and Max seemed to know it. And when that truth came out, no one in the room would be able to pretend they hadn't heard it. The moment the recess ended, everyone seemed to sit a little straighter in the courtroom. The jurors leaned forward, sensing the weight of what had just happened. Even those who might have dismissed a dog's behavior as coincidence couldn't ignore the way Max's gaze had drilled into Marcus Trent like a silent accusation. But Claire Hastings knew something else. They were close to unlocking a piece of testimony Lily had been holding back. It wasn't deliberate secrecy. It was the way trauma works on a child's mind, fragmenting, hiding, and reshaping memories until something suddenly brings them into focus. The something had just happened. Claire waited for the judge's nod before stepping closer to the witness stand. Lily sat there, holding her stuffed bunny, her little feet swinging above the floor. Max sat a few feet away, Daniels, hand resting lightly on his leash, but the dog's eyes never left Lily's face. "Lily," Claire said gently, "you've been very brave. Before the break, you told us about the smell. Do you remember anything else from that night? Anything you heard?" Lily's gaze went down to her bunny. She stroked its ear with her thumb, thinking hard. For a moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer. Then, almost in a whisper, "I heard the song." The room stilled again. "What song, Lily?" Claire asked, her voice soft but urgent. Lily's lips trembled. "The man? He was humming. Mommy told him to go away, and he laughed, and then he hummed the song again." Brooks was on his feet. "Your Honor, I object," leading the witness into vague, unreliable memory. The judge raised a hand. "Overruled." "Continue, Ms. Hastings, but keep the questions open-ended." Claire nodded and turned back to Lily. "Can you hum the song for us?" Lily took a shaky breath, then began humming a slow, haunting melody. It was childlike in delivery, but undeniably distinct. The moment the first notes left her lips, Daniel's head snapped toward Trent. He wasn't the only one. 2 jurors visibly reacted, as though recognizing it. Claire let the hum linger, then asked, "Do you know where you've heard that song before?" Lily nodded. "At the park. Mommy said the man with the hat always hummed it when he sat by the swings. He had a dog, but not like Max. His dog was mean." That was the crack Claire had been waiting for. She glanced at her notes, then at the judge. "Your Honor, we have audio evidence from a neighbor's doorbell camera, captured the night before the incident, that recorded this exact melody being hummed by a male voice while passing the Harper home. We also have multiple social media videos showing Mr. Trent humming the same tune while participating in a local fair 3 months prior." Brooks leapt up again. "Coincidence? Humming is hardly unique." Claire didn't even look at him. "The melody," she continued, "happens to be an old folk song rarely known outside a small Appalachian community where Mr. Trent lived for 8 years. We can document that fact." The jurors' eyes were locked on Trent now. He sat stiffly, his jaw working as if chewing on something unpleasant. Judge Whitford leaned forward. Ms. Hastings, proceed carefully, but proceed. Claire returned her attention to Lily. Sweetheart, when you heard the man humming, did Max do anything? Lily's face softened. Max wasn't there that night. But when I hummed it in the park once, Max came running to me. He sat right in front of me, just like now. The room went quiet. Claire let the silence breathe, every second reinforcing. The image of this small girl and the dog somehow connected through memory and instinct. Danielle stepped forward. Permission to test a reaction, Your Honor? The judge hesitated, then nodded. Daniels knelt beside Max, whispered something in his ear, then began softly humming the same melody Lily had just produced. Max's ears went up immediately, and he stood, scanning the room. Then, without hesitation, he walked directly toward Trent's seat, stopped, and sat, staring up at him. Trent's face darkened. This is ridiculous, he muttered. But the damage was done. The jurors had seen it. The judge spoke firmly. The record will reflect that the K-9 displayed a consistent alert toward the defendant during the reproduction of the witness's statement. Brooks' objection was perfunctory, almost hollow now. Even he knew the tide was turning. Claire crouched slightly so she was at eye level with Lily. You've helped us a lot, Lily. Is there anything else? About the man you remember? Anything you saw? Lily frowned, then slowly raised her hand, pointing at Trent. He had that on his shoe, she said. Everyone followed her gaze. Claire's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? On the bottom. That gray stuff. Mommy said it's from the garden. We weren't supposed to step in it because it makes a mess. Daniel stiffened. That garden soil, the rare, coarse volcanic type Mrs. Harper used, had been found in small traces inside the dumpster where the jacket was recovered. Forensics had been unable to link it definitively to anyone, until now. Claire turned to the judge. We will be requesting an immediate examination of the defendant's footwear for trace material. The judge agreed without hesitation, instructing the bailiff to take possession of Trent's shoes. As they were removed, Trent muttered something under his breath, just loud enough for Daniels to hear. You're all wasting your time. But Daniels didn't flinch. He'd heard that tone before, from men who were cornered but hadn't yet accepted it. Lily, still watching, hugged her bunny tighter. Max isn't wasting time, she said softly. The remark wasn't meant for the court record, but the judge heard it. So did the jury. For the first time since the trial began, Marcus Trent looked unsure. The courtroom was still humming with low whispers as the bailiff carried Marcus Trent's shoes away in an evidence bag. The metallic snap of the seal closing sounded final, almost ceremonial, like a lid being shut on a coffin. Claire Hastings kept her gaze steady, though inside she felt a flicker of anticipation she hadn't dared let herself feel until now. If the shoes yielded the trace soil, they would have a physical link to the Harper's garden and to the scene of the crime. Judge Whitford addressed the room. Due to the potential significance of this evidence, I am ordering an expedited forensic analysis. We will recess until results are available. That was supposed to mean hours. But fate had other plans. The courthouse had an in-house forensic lab for quick-turn cases, usually used for drug testing or preliminary DNA work. Today, every technician in the building seemed to understand the stakes. Less than 90 minutes later, Claire's phone buzzed. She read the message twice before allowing herself a quiet, restrained smile. Your Honor, she said when the court reconvened, the lab report is ready. The jurors straightened instantly. Even Brooks, who had been pretending to review notes, looked up sharply. Judge Whitford nodded. Proceed. Claire called the lead technician to the stand, a meticulous woman named Dr. Felicia Grant. Her lab coat still buttoned, her ID badge swinging lightly as she walked. Dr. Grant spoke clearly, projecting to the jury. The soil collected from the defendant's shoe treads matches, with a high degree of certainty, the volcanic loam found exclusively in the Harper residence garden beds. This soil contains a unique mineral composition not replicated in the surrounding county. Brooks was on his feet. Circumstantial. The defendant could have stepped in that garden soil at any time, for any reason, perhaps when visiting the neighborhood. Dr. Grant didn't flinch. The soil also contains trace plant fibers, specifically from Lavandula angustifolia, or English lavender, which Mrs. Harper cultivates in a precise hybrid strain registered to her name. This is not commercially available. The jurors were riveted. Claire let that sink in before adding, "And how fresh were these soil particles, Dr. Grant?" "They retained over 70% moisture content. That indicates they were deposited within 24 hours of being removed from the ground." It was like dropping a match into a puddle of gasoline. Max, who had been lying quietly beside Daniels, suddenly rose and walked toward the defense table. He didn't bark, but the way he stood, head tilted, eyes locked on Trent, felt almost more damning. Brooks tried to block him. "Your Honor, this is—" But Max ignored him, stepping neatly around and planting himself squarely in front of Trent, the leash held loose in Daniel's hand. He sat, then looked up with that same unwavering stare the jury had already seen before. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said evenly, "perhaps we should allow the K-9 officer to explain his animal's behavior for the record." Daniels stepped forward. Max has been trained to alert to specific scents linked to evidence in violent crime investigations. In this case, he has been conditioned to identify both the lavender hybrid and a proprietary cleaning solvent used. In the Harper home, Brooks scoffed. "Dogs can be manipulated." Daniels didn't raise his voice. "Max has no stake in the outcome of this trial, sir. He's not paid, he's not biased, and he doesn't care about the headlines. He only reacts to what his nose tells him. And right now—" Daniels glanced down at Max, who hadn't looked. Away from Trent. "His nose is telling him something the jury should take very seriously." Trent shifted in his seat, his hand curling into a fist on the table. The movement wasn't lost on the jurors, or on Claire. "Mr. Trent," Claire said, "you testified earlier that you had never set foot on the Harper's property. Would you like to revise that statement in light of this evidence?" Brooks hissed under his breath, "Don't answer that." But Trent's pride got the better of him. "I don't care about your dirt samples," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're wasting everyone's time. This whole thing is built on a scared little girl's imagination and a dog that's been taught to play tricks." The room went so still you could hear the faint ticking of the courtroom clock. Claire's eyes narrowed. "Then how do you explain the fact that both the girl and the dog independently reacted to the same tune you were caught humming on camera weeks before the attack?" Trent's lips pressed into a thin line. Brooks tried to cut in again, but the damage was spreading. The jury was reading Trent's body language like a billboard. Judge Whitford called for a short break, but outside the courtroom doors, the tension only thickened. Reporters huddled by the steps, cameras waiting to pounce. Daniels stood in the hallway with Max, who seemed restless, his ears twitching. Claire joined them. "He's close to cracking," she said quietly. Daniels nodded. "Max knows. He's been keyed in on Trent since day one. But today, it's stronger." Claire glanced toward the conference room, where Trent and Brooks were sequestered. "If he keeps showing this behavior in front of the jury, we won't even need the closing argument." When they returned, the judge allowed Daniels to conduct a final scent test for the record. A small tray of items was placed in the center of the room. 3 pairs of shoes of similar make, one of which was Trent's. Only Daniels knew which was which. Max was released from his sit command. He padded forward slowly, sniffing each pair in turn. At the first two, he moved on quickly. But at the third, he froze and sat down and stared at Trent. The jury had just watched an unprompted identification happen right before their eyes. Brooks sank back in his chair. Claire knew this was her moment to seal the emotional hook. She called Lily back to the stand, careful not to overwhelm her. "Lily, do you recognize those shoes?" The little girl nodded. "They're his. I saw them in the hallway light." "In your house?" She nodded again. He was standing in Mommy's lavender. The phrase was so innocent, so childlike, yet it painted a picture far more vivid than any forensic report. The courtroom felt the weight of it. The judge announced that closing arguments would begin the next day. But as the jury filed out, several glanced back, not at Claire, not at Daniels, but at Max, who sat calmly, tail resting on the polished wood floor, still watching Marcus Trent like a sentinel who knew the truth. Trent avoided looking at him. That was the first time all trial that he wouldn't meet the dog's eyes. Claire caught it. Daniels caught it. And so did the jury. The morning of closing arguments broke with a heavy sky. Clouds hung low over the courthouse, their gray weight pressing down like the tension that had built over the past week. Claire Hastings arrived early, pacing the empty courtroom aisle. With her notes in hand, she didn't need them. Every detail of this case was etched in her mind like a carved warning. Max lay at Daniel's feet, eyes half closed but alert. He wasn't restless today. He was waiting. By the time the jury filed in, the room buzzed with electric anticipation. The gallery was packed, reporters, curious citizens, and the Harpers' extended family all pressed into the wooden benches. Even Judge Whitford seemed sharper, his gavel strike echoing like a starter pistol. "Counselors," he said, "you may proceed." Claire stepped forward first. She moved deliberately, her heels clicking on the floor like a countdown. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "throughout this trial, you have seen pieces of a puzzle, a frightened child's testimony, a trail of soil, and lavender, a recorded song hummed by the defendant, and the unshakable instincts of a highly trained canine. Alone, any one of these could be dismissed. Together, they tell a story too clear to ignore." She glanced toward Lily, who sat with her aunt in the front row, clutching a small stuffed fox. That little girl did not imagine a stranger in her home. She recognized his shoes, his smell, even the sound of his voice. And when asked to choose between 100 different scents, Max, with no knowledge of human lies or courtroom strategies, chose Marcus Trent's shoes, every single time. Brooks tried to object when she stepped toward Max, but Judge Whitford allowed it. Claire crouched beside the dog. "Max isn't here to entertain you. He's here because his nose can do what human eyes sometimes can't, tell the truth without words." She stood again, turning her focus to the jury. "And that truth is this. Marcus Trent was in the Harper home the night before Mrs. Harper was attacked. He walked through her lavender garden. He left behind traces of both soil and fear. And he sat here for a week, hoping you wouldn't. Notice what Max saw the first day he walked into this courtroom." Brooks rose for the defense, painting Trent as a victim of coincidence and media bias. He claimed the soil could have transferred from a neighbor's yard. He called Max's abilities theatrical and unscientific. But it was during Brooks' final sentence that the last crack in Trent's composure split wide open. Brooks was saying, "There is no physical proof tying my client to the," when Max suddenly lifted his head and let out a sharp single bark. It wasn't loud enough to seem aggressive, but it cut through Brooks' words like a blade. The room froze. Max stood, eyes fixed on Trent. Daniels gave no command. The dog stepped forward, then sat again, exactly as he had during the scent test. Brooks tried to laugh it off, but the sound died quickly. Claire didn't move. She didn't need to. The jury had seen it, felt it. Max wasn't responding to theatrics. He was reacting, instinctively, undeniably, to the man sitting before them. Judge Whitford cleared his throat. The jury will disregard, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he seemed unable to ignore the weight of that moment. The jury retired to deliberate. The room emptied in waves, spectators filing out, reporters rushing to send updates, Brooks pacing with tight shoulders, Trent sitting motionless. Claire remained by the prosecution table, eyes on the jury door. Daniels leaned on the railing. Max beside him, patient as stone. It took less than 3 hours. When the jury returned, every person in the room seemed to stop breathing. The forewoman stood, hands steady. We, the jury, find the defendant Marcus Trent guilty on all counts. The sound that followed was a mix of gasps, muffled sobs, and the furious scrape of Brooks' chair. Trent's face went pale. His jaw tightened. But his eyes, those hard, calculating eyes, flickered briefly toward Max. And for the first time in the trial, Claire saw something else there. Not contempt, not defiance, fear. Lily clung to her aunt, who whispered something reassuring. Claire allowed herself a small nod in their direction before turning to Daniels. Max was sitting calmly, tail wagging once, twice, as if he knew his work here was done. Daniels smiled faintly. Guess he just wanted the final word. Outside, the sky had finally broken. Rain pattered against the courthouse steps, cool and cleansing. Claire stepped into it, letting the tension drain away. Daniels followed, Max trotting between them, his leash slack. This one's going to be remembered, Daniels said. Claire glanced down at the dog, not because of me. Max's ears flicked at her voice, and for a moment she could almost believe he understood. That night, news outlets across the state ran the same headline. K9 helped secure conviction in Harper. Home assault case jury cites dog's reactions as pivotal. But for Claire, the real story was quieter. It was the image of a little girl sleeping safely for the first time in months, and a dog lying at the foot of her bed, watching the door. Because some witnesses never take the stand, and some heroes never say a word.